Hello, this is Dr. Indrani Dev, Principal, Nistarini College, Purulia. Today I am going to speak about the satire in Gulliver's Travels, Books 1 and 2. Now, first we shall discuss what satire is and what it entails. Satire, as a definition, is a genre of literature or art in which vices or follies are ridiculed with the aim of social or individual improvement. The purpose of satire is to improve social and individual behavior through laughter, ridicule, criticism, parody, irony, sarcasm, exaggeration, or even what we call mock heroic. Because whenever we exaggerate something and speak about it speak about something small, something trivial in a very grand manner, it becomes mock heroic. But what we have to understand is that laughter, though it is a part of comedy, is not an essential part of satire. Satire means laughing at, not laughing with. It is one of the oldest forms of expression, and it is as old as language itself. So, satire is something which is essential to literature. In comedy, we have normally two types of comedies: high comedy and low comedy. High comedy appeals to the intellect. It is witty, sophisticated, and intellectual. It is normally appreciated by a higher social class. It involves the body from the waist upward. That means it appeals to the mind. For example, if we take examples from Shakespeare, examples of high comedy would be the type of Touchstone or Feste. On the other hand, low comedy is appreciated by the general masses. It is boisterous, low, and coarse. It involves buffoonery, clowning, the movement of various parts of the body. It is loud and peculiar noises are made, and it involves a lot of physical acting. Opposite to high comedy, it involves the body from the waist downward. Obviously, low comedy is popular comedy. Low comedy is the type which is used the maximum. And again, taking a cue from Shakespeare, we have Falstaff as an example of low comedy. We come back to satire. Satire deals with the mind. Satire is a type of high comedy, normally, though often low comedy is used for its purposes. The main types of satire are of three kinds: the Horatian satire, the Juvenalian satire, and the Menippean satire. Horatian satire is, if we summarize it, it is light-hearted, humorous, mild. It does not aim to hurt, but it aims at improvement of the people and the society. Often, Horatian satire mentions individuals and pulls them up for laughter. For example, Horatian satire, a very good example of Horatian satire is the Rape of the Lock. Or, for example, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Juvenalian satire is impersonal, bitter, pitiless, harsh. It is scornful. It concentrates on social and general evils in a manner which is scornful, full of outrage and ridicule. According to Juvenal, this kind of satire should avoid ridiculing women and children and also slaves. Juvenalian satire takes many forms. Some examples are Don Juan by Byron, or Orwell's Animal Farm, 1984, and such types. Juvenal himself had 16 satirical poems, which are all what we call general satire. It does not refer to individuals. Menippean satire is also general satire. It attacks human vices and foibles and follies as a whole, like Juvenalian satire, but it is not so harsh, and it has a novel-like length and structure. For example, Gulliver's Travels. For example, another book of Swift, A Tale of a Tub. For example, we have Alice in Wonderland or Voltaire's Candide. When we come to Augustan satire, to which Swift belongs, we find that the Augustan period saw an explosion in satirical activity. There are many reasons for this. The Augustan period in England was predominantly neoclassical, and the purpose of the literature was didactic. It aimed to improve people and society. Now, neoclassicism also means an interest in the development of civilization and urban life. And satire aims always at better social behavior. After the Glorious Revolution of 1688, we have the parliamentary system of democracy emerging in England, and this divided the whole of the country of England into Whigs and Tories. The political scenario was divided into Whigs and Tories. The tussle between the Whigs and the Tories led to political satire, which was very popular and also sometimes extremely vicious. It must also be remembered that the age was an age of prose and reason, and that satire belongs to the sphere of the head, which means high comedy. But as I said, sometimes low comedy is also brought into the picture. A part of Augustan satire, of which we have many representatives like Pope, is Jonathan Swift, one of the greatest satirists of all times. Swift's satire is usually considered as a Juvenalian satire. It is general, bitter, biting, and scornful. As we said, an example is A Tale of a Tub or A Modest Proposal. In A Modest Proposal, he calmly and very calmly he speaks about cutting up children and eating them to take care of the hunger problem in Ireland. When we come to Gulliver's Travels, we find that though it is often considered to be a Juvenalian satire, all the three types are used in this book. The book is novel length in the type of Menippean satire, and the main satire form is general. The first book, that is the Voyage to Lilliput, uses the Horatian model as a whole, and we have even personal satire involved. It is compared to the fourth book, for example, it is less general and less bitter compared to the fourth book, though we have some bitter parts there also. The Juvenalian form increases with every subsequent book, and it reaches its height in the fourth book. In fact, the book Gulliver's Travels, consisting of all the 4 travels, was so bitter and cutting that it had to be published anonymously in 1726. It was much later that people realized that the writer was Jonathan Swift. In this class today, we are dealing with 2 books, the first 2 books, books 1 and 2. And we therefore come to the first book, The Voyage to Lilliput. In this book, the satire is mainly political satire in the Horatian model. The Menippean satire is also used because it is a book form, a novel length satire. We also have to remember that Swift's personal life is an important factor in this satire. Swift's life is not directly brought in, though sometimes it is difficult to see Gulliver as anyone except Swift. Often, Gulliver is interpreted as the representative of the author. And if this is accepted, then the personal factor becomes all the more important. In this book, The Voyage to Lilliput, the personalities who are attacked are real persons in the reign of Queen Anne. Queen Anne died in 1714. And also in the reign of George I, who came after Queen Anne. The whole of politics is the butt of satire in this book. Regarding Gulliver, I need to add a few more points. The first interpretation, as we have already discussed, is that the character Gulliver and the author are the same, and that is why probably the book was published anonymously, because Swift feared prosecution. But it is also true that Gulliver's Travels is an anti-Whig satire. The second interpretation is that Gulliver is everyman, you, me, the man on the street. And this aspect of Gulliver becomes more prominent in the second book and the fourth book. But in the first book, we often feel that Gulliver is the author himself. When we come to the political scene in the book of Lilliput, we find that in many ways the kingdom of Lilliput is a parallel to the Whig government in the time of King George I, who ruled from 1714 to 1727. In fact, the Emperor of Lilliput is based on George I. And as in mock heroic writings, George I is described in terms of praise, but there is a hidden meaning of satire and comedy lying below this description. For example, I am reading out a small part of the description of the Emperor of Lilliput, who is based upon George I. He is taller by almost the breadth of my nail than any of his coat, which alone is enough to strike an awe into the beholders. His features are strong and masculine, with an Austrian lip, an arched nose, his complexion olive, his countenance erect, his body and limbs well proportioned, all his motions graceful, and his deportment majestic. Now you will find that the language is the language of praise. And George I was actually extremely ugly. But the way Swift describes him, with the Austrian lip and arched nose, this parallels the kings. Another example is the two political parties in Lilliput, the Tramixon and the Slamixon parties, which are based on the Whigs and the Tories. The Tramixons are the Whigs and the Slamixons are the Tories. Now, even the people in the court of the king, they follow one or the other party. Each party is characterized by his heels. The Tramixons are those who wear high heels, and the Slamixons are those who wear low heels. The king or the emperor, he used to wear low heels. And the crown prince, he is shown in a wonderful bit of comedy wearing one high heel and one low heel, and so he hobbled while he walked. There are other characters also, all political. The most powerful person in Lilliput is Flimnap, the treasurer. Flimnap is based on Robert Walpole, the first de facto Prime Minister of England, and who was in fact, in history, the Lord Treasurer. History also tells us that George I was blindly led by Walpole. Walpole was a Whig, and because this is an anti-Whig satire, Swift was against him, because Swift was on the side of the Tories. Flimnap is shown as the best rope dancer in Lilliput. Now, the people of Lilliput, particularly those in the court, they had to show their expertise in rope dancing before they were given any political posts in the country. Flimnap is shown to be the best rope dancer. But Flimnap also falls once. But the fall does not kill him or break his neck. He is miraculously saved by a cushion of the king which was lying there on the ground. And it is said that this cushion in real life was the Duchess of Kendal, the king's mistress. Now, Walpole was kicked away from power in 1717. He resigned in 1717, in fact. But he was brought back to power by the help of the king's mistress, the Duchess of Kendal. That was in the year 1721. And therefore, here, Flimnap is shown to be saved by the cushion of the king lying on the ground. The second most influential person in the kingdom is Reldresal, the principal secretary of private affairs. Now, this person in real life is based on either Viscount Townshend or Lord Carteret, who were both close allies of Robert Walpole and both were highly ambitious politicians. Reldresal is Gulliver's friend in the book, and he shows his ambition in the book by his antics on the rope, dangerous games on the rope. But his friendship is shown later, ironically, because when Gulliver is brought to trial, he sues for mercy for Gulliver, telling the king to allow him to live, but to put out both his eyes or to starve him to death. That is supposed to be merciful, according to Reldresal, who pretends to be Gulliver's friend. That is exactly what happened in the case of Viscount Townshend and Lord Carteret, both of them in the politics of England at that time. On the other hand, the person who is avowedly Gulliver's mortal enemy is a person called Skyrish Bolgolam, who is based on either the Earl of Nottingham or the Duke of Marlborough, who were strong enemies of Swift in real life. When we come to Swift's personal life, because that is what we had discussed. Swift's personal life is directly involved in many ways in the book. Swift began his career as a Whig under Sir William Temple. Later, he changed to Tory because of the policies of Queen Anne in the War of Spanish Succession, and also in the manner in which she imposed taxes on the Irish people. After that, Swift changed over to the Tory side. As we said, this is shown in the fact that Gulliver's Travels as a whole, taking into account all the 4 books, is an anti-Whig satire. Swift's personal likes and dislikes become very prominent in the satire. For example, Skyrish Bolgolam. Skyrish Bolgolam, or the Earl of Nottingham, if we take him to be the Earl of Nottingham, he had opposed Swift's candidacy for the post of bishop, which hurt Swift greatly. If we take him to be the Duke of Marlborough, the Duke was instrumental in instigating the War of Spanish Succession, which was held in the year 1712 to 1713. So, personal satire is strongly there in the first book. But we also have a dose of general satire in the book on Lilliput. The general satire concerns England as a country and all the religious concerns of the 18th century in England. Lilliput, of course, as a whole represents England, and Blefuscu, the other island who is at war with Lilliput, represents France. In this case, the big enders, the war is between the big enders and the little enders. The big enders are those who are supposed to break an egg on the big end, and the little enders are those who break the egg on the little end, and a huge fight ensues. But in the book, the big enders represent the Roman Catholics, and Blefuscu is predominantly Roman Catholic like France. The little enders are the Protestants who dominate in Lilliput. Therefore, the war between Lilliput and Blefuscu is mainly religious, and in real life, this war also represents England's role in the War of Spanish Succession. In this book, for example, we have a direct reference to historical figures who worked either against the Roman Catholics or against the Protestants. There is a reference to the emperor of Lilliput's grandfather in this book. The emperor's grandfather was Charles I and James II. And all the historical incidents relating to quarrels between Protestants and Catholics in England are shown in this chapter. For example, there is a reference to the emperor's grandfather cutting his finger while breaking the egg at the wrong end. And this is an obvious reference to Henry VIII's spat with the Pope regarding the divorce with Catherine and marrying Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII's marrying Anne Boleyn. There is a reference to one emperor who lost his life. Obviously, that is Charles I, who supported the Catholics. Another emperor lost his crown. That is a reference to James II, who was deposed after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. The general satire, on the whole, also refers to the littleness of the size of the Lilliputs. It also represents the littleness in the minds of British politicians of the time. However, there are many genuine places where Swift is openly admiring the Lilliputs. The country is well organized. The people are extremely good mathematicians and scientists, but this is not reflected in the minds of the people. The pettiness and the cruelty of the politicians of England are the targets of attack. For example, we have the ridiculous charges against Gulliver brought by the Lilliputians, the cruelty of the punishments pronounced against him, but everything is given in the language of praise. Swift's opinion of the Lilliputs, however, is shown in the incident in which he urinates on the Lilliputs on the king's palace while the fire is raging in the king's palace, in the king's grounds, and Gulliver urinates on them to put out the fire. This is Gulliver's opinion of the Lilliputs. When we come to the second book now, The Voyage to Brobdingnag, which is, we can say in a way, a sequel to the Voyage to Lilliput. It must be remembered that the Voyage to Lilliput is a standalone book. The satire, both individual and general, can be appreciated on its own. That is why the Voyage to Lilliput is often read separately, and it can be read separately. But the satire in the second book, The Voyage to the Land of Giants, is directly dependent on that of the first book, and it cannot be appreciated on its own. Taken alone, the second book will seem to be just a mere fairy tale. The bigness of the Brobdingnagians is a foil to the littleness of the Lilliputs, which shows that greatness is a relative quality. Gulliver himself is great in Lilliput, but he is petty in Brobdingnag. The satire in Book 2 is Menippean, except for Gulliver's conversations with the king, in which the Juvenalian form comes in. In this book, every Lilliputian characteristic is paralleled with a corresponding Brobdingnagian characteristic. For example, we can give a few examples. In Lilliput, Gulliver destroys the fleet, the Blefuscu fleet, alone. In Brobdingnag, Gulliver's greatness is shown by killing a giant rat. In Lilliput, there are long descriptions in which the Lilliputians find Gulliver extremely ugly. In Brobdingnag, Gulliver finds the giants to be extremely ugly. So, every point is paralleled. The satire in Book 1 is mostly connected with 18th century politics. In Book 2, the satire is more general. Particular political incidents do not come into the picture in Book 2. In Book 2, rather, one important satirical method is used in the technique of exaggeration. Everything is bigger than normal, including physical dirtiness, excrement, human excrement, the ugliness of the Brobdingnagians. Everything is exaggerated. In fact, the first two books stand on binary oppositions, and the satire depends on these binary oppositions. The chart will show this. Lilliput is small. The Brobdingnagians are big. The Lilliputians are low. The giants are high. Lilliput shows culture. The whole country is well organized, cultured, and very high in politics and philosophy and mathematics. The Brobdingnagians show nature. The Lilliputians are complex. The Brobdingnagians are simple. In the same way, the Lilliputians are proud, the giants are modest. Lilliputians, in spite of their puny appearances, they are ruthless and cruel. The giants are human. In Lilliput, man is shown to be silly and contemptible. In Brobdingnag, man is at his natural best. The giants have their faults, both physical and moral faults, but these faults are those of general humanity. And because there are faults, these serve to make them more human. The giants look on Gulliver with contempt, like an insect or a rat. Whereas Gulliver, when he was in Lilliput, he looked on them with contempt. One of the basic satirical places in the book of Brobdingnag is Gulliver's conversations with the king. In this book, Gulliver proudly tells the king about his own country because the king wants to know about it, and the achievements of his country in wars particularly. It is very important that the Brobdingnagian king remains unimpressed. However much Gulliver tries to show the importance and power of the people of England, the Brobdingnagian king remains unimpressed. In this book, Gulliver wants to prove his greatness to the king, and he proposes to give him a small tribute to show his gratitude for the king's generosity. According to Gulliver, through the tribute, the king will become all-powerful and the undisputed monarch of the area around Brobdingnag. And what is the tribute? The tribute is that of gunpowder, which is completely unknown to the Brobdingnagians. Gulliver is proudly telling the king about gunpowder. I'm reading a small part where he is proudly telling the king about the effects of gunpowder. The largest balls thus discharged would not only destroy whole ranks of an army at once, but batter the strongest walls to the ground, sink down ships with 1,000 men in each to the bottom of the sea, and when linked together by a chain, would cut through masts and rigging, divide hundreds of bodies in the middle, and lay all waste before them. That we often put this powder into large hollow balls of iron and discharge them by an engine into some city we were besieging, which would rip up the pavement, tear the houses to pieces, burst and throw splinters on every side, dashing out the brains of all who come near. And after the entire description which goes on, he says, This I humbly offered to His Majesty as a small tribute of acknowledgement in return of so many marks that I had received of His royal favor and protection. The king is horrified. I am reading out the king's reaction to Gulliver's proposal. The king was struck with horror at the description I had given of those terrible engines and the proposal I had made. He was amazed how so impotent and grovelling an insect as I could entertain such inhuman ideas and in so familiar a manner as to appear wholly unmoved at all the scenes of blood and desolation which I had painted. This is the king's reaction. He is filled with horror. Finally, he says, this is one of the most telling lines in the whole of the book. His assessment of Gulliver and human beings in England. The king says to Gulliver, I cannot but conclude the bulk of your natives to be the most pernicious race of little odious vermin ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. This is what the king says to Gulliver. To sum up, we come to the final part of the assessment of the satire, the discussion on satire. That is the concept of utopia and dystopia. Utopia is a land in which human society is shown as an ideal. A dystopia shows human society negatively. And that is why dystopia is often a tool for satire. In Gulliver's Travels, the 4 books are based on the utopia-dystopia contrast. Generally, I'm not going into particulars. The odd books, that means the Voyage to Lilliput and the Voyage to Laputa, etc., are dystopian. Whereas the even books, that is book 2, Brobdingnag, and the Hohenheims in the 4th book, are utopian. Of course, the matter is not so linear. Lilliput has elements of utopia, and many parts are directly influenced by Thomas More and Plato, because it was in More's book Utopia that we discover the concept for the first time. In many respects, on the other hand, Brobdingnag is dystopian. Lilliput is well organized and it has many admirable qualities. In many respects, Brobdingnag also can be criticized. The same can be said of book 3 and 4. The book of the Voyage to Laputa and the Voyage to the Hohenheims. Both Thomas More and Plato, they show societies where, that means the utopian societies, in which the individual interest is subordinated to the collective interest. This is true in Lilliput. But the satire is not directed at how the country is run. The satire depends on the size and the minds of Lilliput. In Lilliput, the society is in many ways utopian, but the people are puny, petty, jealous, proud, and greedy. In Brobdingnag, on the other hand, the society has much to be desired. It is in many ways scientifically backward. But the people are honest, good-hearted, simple, and kind. Rather, we have often discussed the concept of the noble savage in the character of the Brobdingnagians, the concept of simple living and high thinking. This is a concept which was highly admired in Augustan society as well, a quality which they regarded with great admiration. Simple living and high thinking. That is why Brobdingnag is in many ways dystopian, in many ways utopian also. But taken together, if we take it in a linear manner, it is the character of the people which show them to be either utopian or dystopian. Thank you very much. In the next lecture, we shall discuss Book 3 and 4. Thank you.